Indigenous peoples and the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Indigenous peoples' lands, territories and resources are often regarded by the dominant states and businesses as a resource that can simply be taken and exploited.
Traditional Sami lands, they are considered the state property.
As Indigenous peoples defend their rights, they are criminalised, marginalised and abused. To address these and other human rights abuses and violations, in June 2011, the United Nations adopted the Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. This is the UnGP. Business can create jobs, growth and infrastructure, but can also engage in corruption, pollution and human rights violations. So it is important to implement the guiding principles to ensure businesses respect human rights. The UNGP is a framework applicable to states and businesses. It clarifies their duties and responsibilities in relation to human rights when doing business. These apply to all states and to all business enterprises, both small and large, local and international. The UNGP consists of 3 pillars: protect, respect, remedy. Protect. The state's duty is to protect against human rights abuses. Respect. Business shall respect and avoid infringing human rights.
Business entities, they should make sure that UNGP should be implemented to make sure that Indigenous people's right is not violated.
Remedy. States and businesses should ensure access to effective remedies for rights violations. Supporting the UNGP. The UNGP is overseen by the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Their mandate is to promote the UNGP, identify good practices, make recommendations for effective remedies, monitor alleged human rights abuses and intervene if necessary, and importantly, guide the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. The UN Forum on Business and Human Rights is an annual 3-day event. It serves as a global platform for stakeholders to discuss trends and challenges and promote dialogue and cooperation on issues linked to business and human rights. The participation of Indigenous peoples within the forum enables them to advocate for the inclusion of the collective rights enshrined in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UnGP.
И могу сказать, что форум, который проводится ежегодно, форум глобальный бизнес и права человека, на нем голос коренных народов очень-очень громко. Я очень надеюсь, что рабочая группа также продолжит работать по коренным народам, по защите их прав.
The forum enables them to raise awareness on the human rights abuses and violations committed against them, to advance and develop a common position and recommendations, engage directly with members of the working group, network and strengthen solidarity with NGOs and other allies. Engage with financial institutions, businesses and states and other relevant actors. It is fundamental that Indigenous peoples engage at the different levels: international, regional and national. Implementing the UNGP, National Action Plans, NAP. These should be developed through a multi-stakeholder platform including Indigenous peoples. An NAP should include commitments by the states on how business will be regulated and how the 3 pillars will be implemented. A decade of UNGP implementation. After 10 years of the UNGP, challenges still remain as the rights of Indigenous peoples continue to be ignored and violated by states and businesses.
For example, on the Norwegian side, there is the Fosen wind power plant, which is, I believe, the biggest wind power park in Europe. And that is built on traditional Sami territories and without consent.
There are some good experience, but there are some not so good experiences on these mines. We want people here have a job, but they don't actually do that. And there's also a lot of environmental issues.
The NAPs in many countries miss the opportunity to address wide-scale violation of human rights, as well as developing policies to implement the standards enshrined in UnGP. This includes free, prior and informed consent, FPIC, and the recognition of customary justice systems as part of the remedy pillar.
Nuestros territorios y bosques son vida, no son mercancía. Los pueblos indígenas hemos insistido que nuestros territorios no están a la venta. Las empresas deben cumplir con su debida diligencia y respetar nuestro derecho al consentimiento libre, previo e informado. Asimismo, deben cumplir con los estándares internacionales de derechos humanos en todas sus actividades, incluida su cadena de producción.
However, progress has been made that benefits Indigenous peoples, including voluntary due diligence by businesses, an increase of NAPs with the participation of Indigenous peoples, raised awareness and attention to human rights abuses. There are examples proving that collaboration can work. In Australia, a participation agreement was created between Argyle Diamonds and the Miriwong, Gija, Malning and Woolnar peoples on whose lands an Argyle mine sits. In the Arctic, the Sami people successfully campaigned to have Stora Enso, a multinational paper company, change its wood procurement practices.
Companies often want to maintain some kind of image of being respectful towards human rights, towards Indigenous people's rights, environmental standards, and so on. Nowadays, that social media can be used very effectively to mobilize a lot of attention.
Regional and national progress has been seen in Latin American countries with the development of FPIC protocols and judiciary decisions related to human rights abuses by businesses. But it remains a very dangerous environment for human rights defenders. What do Indigenous peoples want over the next 10 years?
What we envision in the next decade of UNGP implementation, a change in the behavior of companies and governments in engaging with Indigenous peoples based on the respect for our rights, our dignity, and our roles as stewards of nature. And we need effective mechanisms for states and companies to be accountable to their human rights obligations. We need states to adopt a legally binding treaty for business to respect human rights as an urgent concern.
There are differences between the hopes related to states, business, and among Indigenous peoples themselves, but there are fundamentals that form the foundation of the cooperation required to achieve a sustainable balance between business, human rights, and Indigenous peoples. So what is it that Indigenous peoples are hoping for? Integration of the UNDRIP in the UNGP implementation, including the proper application of FPIC. Recognise, respect and support community-driven FPIC protocols and guidelines when engaging with Indigenous peoples. Establish effective mechanisms for Indigenous peoples' access to remedy at project, national, regional and global levels, as well as the integration of Indigenous customary justice systems. Conduct outreach for awareness raising on the rights of Indigenous peoples and the UNGP. Establish effective mechanisms for the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples at all levels, especially of women and youth.
Было бы очень важно, чтобы мы, старшее поколение, конечно же, уделяли больше внимания развитию и образованию молодежи, чтобы наша молодежь могла права своих народов на том же уровне, на котором делается и в рамках ООН, и в рамках.
Our greatest hope is for a just, equitable, and sustainable world with respect for diversity and the dignity of all its people.